Ambassador Chun-Wei sat quietly in the circular chamber of the Galactic Council, his weathered hands folded on the polished table as the Zephyrian delegate continued his presentation. The holographic display showed human colonies scattered across 3 star systems, each one marked in the distinctive blue of the Zephyrian Empire. As you can see, honored members, Ambassador Crothwell gestured with one of his 4 arms. These primitive settlements represent minimal strategic value. The humans have shown no signs of advanced military capability. Their ships are crude, their weapons basic. Integration into the Empire will proceed smoothly. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Corathans bobbed their massive heads in approval, while the insectoid hivemind delegates clicked their mandibles in what passed for laughter among their species. Even the normally cautious ethereal collective seemed amused by the proposal. Chun-Wei cleared his throat softly. If I may address the council? The chamber fell silent. Most delegates had forgotten the human representative was even present. His species had been granted observer status only recently, after their first contact with galactic civilization 3 years ago. Ambassador Chun. The council moderator's voice carried the tone one might use with a child. While we appreciate your presence, this matter has been thoroughly discussed among the relevant parties. I understand, Chun replied, his voice calm despite the dismissive treatment. I simply wish to request a 30-day period for my government to respond to this proposal. Crothwell's scales shifted from blue to an amused orange. 30 days to what? Prepare surrender documents. The chamber erupted in what passed for laughter among the various species. The Zephyrian delegate continued. Your species has shown remarkable adaptability in agriculture and basic manufacturing. Under imperial guidance, humans could contribute significantly to our empire's prosperity. This is truly a generous offer. Chun-Wei nodded slowly. I will convey your terms to my government immediately. Excellent, Crothwell replied. I trust they will see the wisdom in accepting peacefully. Our initial surveys suggest humans have never engaged in large-scale warfare. This transition should be seamless. As the council session ended, Chun-Wei gathered his materials with deliberate care. Other delegates filed past him, some offering patronizing nods of sympathy. The Corathan representative even patted his shoulder with what was likely meant as reassurance. Do not despair, small human, the massive being rumbled. The Zephyrians treat their subjects well. Your people will adapt. 3 hours later, Chun-Wei sat in his small quarters aboard the diplomatic station, staring at the quantum communicator. He had drafted his message 3 times, each version more carefully worded than the last. Finally, he activated the device and began speaking. Priority message to Earth Central Command. Classification, Omega Black. The Galactic Council has approved Zephyrian annexation of colonies Alpha, Beta, and Gamma. Timeline, 30 days. Diplomatic solutions exhausted. Request immediate activation of Protocol 7. He paused, looking out the viewport at the stars beyond. They believe we are harmless. They believe we have never fought a war. His voice grew quieter, almost sad. God help them all. In message. The transmission shot through space at quantum speeds, reaching Earth in mere minutes. In a bunker beneath the Swiss Alps, General Patricia Hayes read the decoded message twice before reaching for a secured communication device. This is Hayes. Authentication Tango 77 Alpha. Execute Protocol 7 immediately. Contact all reserve commands. Wake the sleepers. Across human space, quantum signals began pulsing to planets the galactic community had never discovered. Hidden bases that had been dormant for decades suddenly blazed with activity. On worlds thought to be mere farming colonies, underground hangars opened to reveal ships that bore no resemblance to the crude vessels the galaxy had observed. Admiral Marcus Chun, the ambassador's cousin, stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Retribution as its systems powered up for the first time in 15 years. Around him, men and women who had been living as farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers moved with the practiced precision that came from decades of military service. Communications, signal the fleet, Marcus ordered. All vessels, this is Reaper Command. The harvest is over. Time to remind the galaxy who we really are. Meanwhile, on the agricultural world of Haven, Master Sergeant Sarah Kim looked up from her vegetable garden as the emergency beacon began broadcasting. Her husband appeared in the doorway of their modest farmhouse, already wearing the expression she remembered from their military days. "Orders are coming through," he said quietly. "Looks like retirement is officially over." Sarah nodded, wiping soil from her hands. "How long do we have?" "Transport leaves in 6 hours. Full deployment in 72 hours. She looked at their peaceful garden one more time, then walked toward their barn. Hidden beneath the hay and farming equipment lay weapons and armor that had seen action across a dozen star systems. The galaxy might know humans as farmers and merchants, but that was only because the veterans had chosen to hang up their guns. That was about to change. On Zephyria Prime, Supreme Commander Vashkor reviewed the invasion plans with satisfaction. 3 fleets, each capable of overwhelming any resistance the primitive humans might offer. The operation was scheduled to begin in 28 days, allowing time for the humans to see reason and surrender peacefully. "Sir," his aide reported, "our deep space sensors are detecting some unusual activity in human space. Increased energy signatures, ship movements." Vashkor's scales shifted to a pleased green. "Excellent. They are likely preparing their evacuation plans. See how cooperative they become when faced with superior force." The aide checked his readings again, frowning. "Sir, these energy signatures are quite powerful. Much stronger than anything we've observed from human technology." "Impossible," Vashkor dismissed. "Their most powerful vessels barely register on our threat assessment scale. Continue monitoring, but do not let primitive fear-mongering delay our timeline." 3 systems away, the human cargo vessel Peaceful Trader continued its regular route between colonies, just as it had for the past 2 years. The Zephyrian patrol that scanned it found exactly what they expected: agricultural products, basic manufactured goods, and a crew of 5 humans who seemed appropriately nervous when questioned. What the patrol didn't detect was the signal array hidden in the ship's cargo bay, or the fact that Captain Rodriguez had been relaying tactical information to hidden human bases for months. They certainly didn't realize that the nervous merchant they were questioning had once commanded a battlecruiser squadron in the Outer Rim conflicts. "Safe travels," the Zephyrian patrol leader had said dismissively. "Enjoy your freedom while it lasts." Captain Rodriguez had smiled and nodded, playing the part of the frightened civilian perfectly. But as his ship cleared the patrol zone, he activated a concealed communication array. "GhostNet, this is Wanderer. The sheep are in the pen. Shepherds are sleeping. Wolves are coming home." The response came immediately. "Acknowledged, Wanderer. Welcome back to the pack." Across human space, similar messages flashed through hidden networks. Veterans who had spent years playing the role of peaceful colonists began shedding their disguises. The galaxy had made a fundamental error in judgment, one that would cost them dearly. They had assumed that humans were naturally peaceful because they had never seen them at war. The truth was far more terrifying. Humanity's veterans had simply been waiting for a reason to fight again. In 25 days, the Zephyrian Empire would discover the difference between a species that couldn't fight and one that simply chose not to. The lesson would be written in plasma fire across the stars, and the galaxy would never make the same mistake again. The Zephyrian Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, exactly as Admiral Vorthclem had planned. 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and over 100 support vessels spread across the Alpha Colony system like a metal constellation. Their arrival was meant to be a show of overwhelming force, designed to break any remaining human resistance before the invasion began. Instead, they found empty space. "Admiral," the sensor operator reported, his scales flickering with confusion, "I'm reading no human vessels in the system. The colony appears abandoned." Vorthclem examined the tactical display, his 4 eyes focusing on different readouts simultaneously. The human settlements were still there, clearly visible on the planet's surface, but no ships defended them. No communication attempts. No surrender signals. "Perhaps they fled," suggested his tactical officer. "Our intelligence indicated they had at least 30 vessels based here." "Where would they go?" Vorthclem wondered aloud. "We control the hyperspace lanes. Begin orbital scans. I want to know where those ships went." The answer came 17 minutes later, though not from his sensors. The first sign of trouble was the destroyer Relentless simply vanishing from the tactical display. No explosion, no distress signal, The massive warship simply stopped existing in the span of a heartbeat. What happened to the Relentless? Clem demanded. Before anyone could answer, 3 more destroyers disappeared in rapid succession. This time, the flagship's sensors caught brief flashes of energy, weapons fire that seemed to come from empty space itself. "Sir, we're detecting ships," the sensor operator called out. They're everywhere." The tactical display lit up with crimson contacts as human vessels materialized from what had seemed like empty space. They were sleek, angular craft unlike anything in the galactic databases, their hulls nearly invisible to conventional sensors. Worse still, there were far more of them than intelligence had suggested. "All ships, evasive action," Clem ordered. "Return fire." The Zephyrian fleet responded with trained precision, their energy weapons lancing out toward the human vessels. Most of the shots passed harmlessly through space. The human ships moved with impossible agility, dancing between the massive alien vessels like predators among prey. But when the humans fired back, their weapons found their marks with surgical precision. Captain Elena Vasquez watched the tactical display from the bridge of her stealth destroyer Shadowhawk, her hands moving across control surfaces with the fluid grace that came from 30 years of naval combat. Around her, the bridge crew worked with silent efficiency, each one a veteran of conflicts the galaxy had never heard of. "Target their command vessel," she ordered. "Full spread, maximum yield." "Captain," her tactical officer called out, "their armor is thick. Our conventional weapons might not penetrate." Elena smiled grimly. "Who said anything about conventional weapons?" The Shadowhawk's main cannon charged with a sound like reality tearing. The weapon that emerged from its barrel wasn't an energy beam or projectile. It was a controlled burst of antimatter, focused, and accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. The Zephyrian flagship's shields collapsed instantly. The antimatter beam carved through their armor like a hot knife through butter, emerging from the other side of the massive vessel in a shower of superheated metal and plasma. Secondary explosions rippled along the ship's length as ammunition stores and fuel tanks ignited. "Impossible," Clem whispered, watching his flagship die around him. "How do they have such weapons?" His communication officer looked up from his station, scales pale with fear. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human vessels." "Put it through." The main display flickered, revealing a human female in what appeared to be a military uniform. She was middle-aged, with gray streaking her black hair and scars that spoke of combat experience. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority that came from years of command. "Zephyrian vessels, this is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Defense Force. You have entered sovereign human space with hostile intent. You have one opportunity to withdraw immediately." Clem drew himself to his full height. "I am Admiral Clem of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy. You will stand down immediately. Your primitive weapons cannot." His words were cut off as another human vessel materialized directly behind one of his cruisers and opened fire. The alien ship's reactor went critical, its destruction visible even from the flagship's bridge. The human admiral continued speaking as if nothing had happened. "Admiral, your intelligence about human military capability appears to be flawed. You have 30 seconds to begin your withdrawal, or we will demonstrate the full extent of that error." "You dare threaten the Imperial Navy?" Clem snarled. "We have over 100 ships. Your handful of vessels, Admiral." His sensor operator interrupted, voice breaking with terror. "I'm reading over 300 human contacts now. They're still decloaking." The tactical display had become a nightmare of red symbols as more and more human vessels revealed themselves. They had been surrounding the Zephyrian fleet from the moment it arrived, invisible and patient. What had seemed like a few dozen scout ships was actually a full battle fleet. Admiral Chin's expression didn't change. 15 seconds, Admiral. Clem looked at his tactical officer, who shook his head grimly. "Sir, we're outnumbered 3-1, and their weapons technology is far beyond our estimates. Recommend immediate withdrawal. The Empire does not retreat from primitives." Clem declared. "All ships, attack formation. Show these humans the might of." He never finished the sentence. A human heavy cruiser materialized directly above the flagship and opened fire with weapons that defied everything the Zephyrians knew about physics. The beam that struck the flagship didn't just destroy armor. It seemed to unravel the very molecular structure of the ship's hull. As emergency klaxons wailed and his command staff scrambled to abandon ship, Vorthclem heard Admiral Chen's voice one final time. "I tried to warn you, Admiral. Humanity has been fighting wars since before your species discovered fire. The only difference is we learned to be good at it." The evacuation pod that carried the surviving Zephyrian admiral away from the battle transmitted everything back to Imperial Command. They watched in horror as the Third Fleet, one of their most powerful formations, was systematically dismantled by human forces that appeared to be using technology centuries ahead of anything in the galactic database. On Zephyria Prime, Supreme Commander Vashkor stared at the tactical recordings with growing disbelief. The humans had ships that could become invisible to sensors. They had weapons that could cut through Imperial armor like tissue paper. Worst of all, they moved and fought with a coordination that spoke of extensive combat experience. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his intelligence chief. "Our surveys showed primitive vessels, basic weapons." "Sir," the intelligence officer replied nervously, "it appears they were hiding their true capabilities." Vashkor's scales shifted through several colors as he processed this information. "You mean they deliberately deceived us?" "It would appear so, sir. The vessels we observed were likely civilian craft or deliberately primitive decoys. Their actual military appears to be far more advanced than we calculated." Meanwhile, in the Alpha Colony system, Admiral Sarah Chun stood on her flagship's bridge, watching the last of the Zephyrian vessels disappear into hyperspace. Around her, the human fleet began to shimmer and fade as stealth systems re-engaged. "Admiral," her communication officer reported, "we're receiving messages from fleets across human space. Beta and Gamma systems report similar victories. Total enemy losses, 43% of their invasion force." Sarah nodded slowly. "Signal all commands. Phase 2 is authorized. Time to take the fight to them." "Ma'am," her tactical officer spoke up, "shouldn't we try diplomacy first? We've made our point." Sarah's expression hardened. "Lieutenant, I spent 15 years fighting to protect human colonies from raiders and slavers. The galaxy ignored our calls for help because we were too primitive to matter. Now they want to enslave our people because we're too weak to resist." She turned to look out at the stars, her voice carrying the weight of decades of military command. "They started this war under the assumption that humanity was harmless. Time to show them what happens when you mistake restraint for weakness." Across human space, fleets that had been hidden for years began moving toward the borders of known space. Ships emerged from asteroid bases, from hollow moons, from the depths of gas giant atmospheres where they had waited in silence for years. The galaxy had declared war on humanity under the assumption they were dealing with a primitive, peaceful species. They were about to discover that humanity had been preparing for this war for decades, and that their veterans had spent their retirement years planning for the day when diplomacy would fail. The Zephyrian Empire had awakened something they didn't understand, and now they would learn why humans had survived and thrived on every world they had ever called home. The lesson would be written in burning ships across a dozen star systems, and the galaxy would never underestimate humanity again. The mining station Kethvar had been operating in the asteroid belt for 12 standard years, extracting rare elements that were essential for Zephyrian ship construction. Its crew of 300 considered themselves fortunate to be stationed far from any potential conflict zones. When news of the human uprising reached them, the station commander had actually laughed. "Let the Navy deal with those primitives," he had told his staff. "We have quotas to meet." That confidence lasted until the facility's defense grid began tracking and approaching contact that shouldn't exist. Chief Engineer Grathvel studied the sensor readings with growing confusion. The object approaching their station was massive, easily the size of a heavy cruiser, but it wasn't showing up on any of their military scanners. Only the mining sensors designed to track asteroids were registering its presence. "Commander," he called to the command center, "we have an unidentified object approaching. It appears to be camouflaged as an asteroid." Commander Vexanael arrived in the sensor bay within minutes, his scales already shifting to the orange of irritation. "What do you mean, camouflaged?" "See for yourself." Grathvel pointed to the display. Mineral composition sensors show standard asteroid composition, iron, nickel, some rare elements. But the mass distribution is all wrong, and it's moving in a powered trajectory. Before the commander could respond, the asteroid was close enough for visual confirmation. What they saw defied explanation. A massive chunk of rock that moved with purpose, its surface pocked with what appeared to be natural craters and mineral veins. All stations, this is mining facility Kethvar. Commander Vexal broadcast on standard frequencies. Unknown vessel disguised as asteroid. Identify yourself immediately. The response came not as a transmission, but as action. The asteroid's surface began to shift and crack, revealing hidden weapon ports and engine nozzles. What had seemed like a natural space rock was actually a sophisticated warship wearing a shell of actual asteroid material. Master Sergeant Tom Bradley stood in the command center of what his crew had nicknamed Big Rock, watching the Zephyrian mining station through tactical displays that were built into what appeared to be natural stone formations. Around him, his team of specialists worked at stations that had been carved directly into asteroid rock, their equipment invisible to any external scan. Sir, his demolitions expert reported, their defense grid is powering up. 6 automated plasma cannons, standard Zephyrian configuration. Communications? Tom asked. They're broadcasting surrender demands. Also sending distress signals. Tom nodded slowly. He had spent 8 years fighting asteroid pirates in the Outer Rim, and another 6 hunting slavers through the Belt Wars. This kind of operation was routine for his team, though the enemy had changed. Signal them back, he ordered. Standard terms. The transmission that went out was simple. Zephyrian facility, this is the Human Defense Force. You have 30 seconds to evacuate all personnel to your lifeboats. This facility will be destroyed to prevent its resources from supporting hostile operations against human colonies. Commander Vexenal's scales shifted to an alarmed red. You cannot destroy this facility. It is a civilian operation. Sir, his tactical officer interrupted. That asteroid, it's not just disguised. I'm reading massive weapons signatures. And there are more contacts approaching. The sensor display lit up with new signatures as more asteroids revealed themselves throughout the belt. What had appeared to be a typical asteroid field was actually swarming with hidden human vessels, each one perfectly camouflaged until they chose to reveal themselves. 15 seconds, came the calm human voice. Vexenal looked around his command center, seeing the fear in his crew's eyes. These were miners and engineers, not soldiers. All hands, abandon station immediately. This is not a drill. Meanwhile, in the Korath system, a different kind of horror was unfolding for the massive insectoid species that had been among humanity's loudest critics in the Galactic Council. The Korath Defense Force had been confident in their ability to repel any human attack. Their ships were massive and heavily armored, designed to withstand anything in the galactic arsenal. What they hadn't anticipated was facing an enemy that didn't fight by galactic rules. Admiral Thekmore commanded the defense fleet from his flagship, a vessel so large it could have served as a mobile space station. Around him, 43 other capital ships maintained a defensive formation around the system's primary shipyard. They had been expecting a direct assault, possibly by stealth ships like those that had ravaged the Zephyrian fleet. What they got instead was something far worse. The first sign of trouble came when their long-range sensors detected what appeared to be a small merchant vessel approaching the system. A single human ship, broadcasting civilian identification codes and requesting permission to trade. Sir, his sensor operator reported, the human vessel is maintaining standard approach vectors. No weapon signatures. It appears to be, actually civilian. Admiral Thekmore's compound eyes studied the readouts carefully. After the disasters at the human colonies, he wasn't taking any chances. Full sensor sweep. I want to know everything about that ship. The scans revealed exactly what they expected, a lightly armed cargo vessel carrying what appeared to be trade goods. No hidden weapons, no unusual energy signatures. Just a single human ship that seemed either very brave or very foolish. Should we allow them to approach? His tactical officer asked. No, Thekmore decided. Order them to leave the system immediately. If they refuse, destroy them. The human ship acknowledged the order and began turning away from the system. Admiral Thekmore watched it disappear beyond sensor range, satisfied that he had avoided whatever trap the humans had been planning. He was still feeling pleased with his caution when the first of his ships began to die. The cargo vessel that had approached them hadn't been carrying trade goods at all. Hidden in its hold were thousands of small, nearly undetectable devices that had been deployed throughout the system during its approach. Each device was no larger than a human fist, designed to remain dormant until activated by remote signal. When that signal came, the Korth Defense Force discovered what human miners had learned to do with shaped charges and industrial explosives. Captain Maria Santos watched the destruction from her concealed observation post at the edge of the system, monitoring feeds from the tiny drones she had deployed. Each drone carried just enough explosive to breach a ship's hull in exactly the right place, usually near ammunition storage or reactor containment systems. "Beautiful work," her demolitions specialist commented as another Korth capital ship suffered a catastrophic reactor breach. 17 simultaneous hits, each one precisely placed. Maria had spent 12 years in the engineering corps before retiring to run a mining operation. She knew exactly where to place charges for maximum effect, and her team had spent weeks planning the placement of each drone for optimal destruction. "Sir," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender signals from the remaining Korth vessels." "Acknowledged," Maria replied. "Signal them back. Withdraw from this system immediately. Any ship that remains in 30 minutes will be destroyed." The surviving Korth vessels didn't wait for the deadline. Admiral Thekmore's remaining ships fled the system within 10 minutes, leaving behind the wreckage of what had been their most powerful defense fleet. Meanwhile, on the border worlds between human space and the Ethereal Collective, an entirely different form of warfare was taking place. The Ethereals were energy beings, creatures of pure thought that inhabited crystalline vessels to interact with physical reality. They had considered themselves immune to physical warfare, confident that their advanced mental abilities would allow them to predict and counter any human attack. Colonel James Park had other ideas. His unit specialized in electronic warfare and psychological operations, skills he had honed during 15 years fighting AI rebellions in the outer colonies. The Ethereals might be creatures of pure thought, but they still relied on technology to interface with the physical world. "Sir," his cyber warfare specialist reported, "we've identified their primary communication network. It's quantum entangled, nearly impossible to hack by conventional means." James smiled grimly. "Good thing we're not using conventional means. Upload the virus package." The weapon they deployed wasn't a traditional computer virus. It was something far more insidious, a piece of corrupted quantum code designed to introduce chaos into coherent thought patterns. When it infiltrated the ethereal communication network, it didn't destroy their technology, it drove them insane. Across 12 ethereal worlds, the incorporeal beings began experiencing something they had never encountered before: madness. Their perfect, logical thought processes became tangled with contradictions and paradoxes that made coherent action impossible. The few ethereal vessels that managed to escape the affected systems carried a simple message back to their leadership: the humans had found a way to weaponize insanity itself. As reports flowed in from across the galaxy, a picture began to emerge that terrified every major power. The humans weren't just better fighters than anyone had imagined. They were completely different kinds of fighters. Each engagement revealed new capabilities, new technologies, new approaches to warfare that defied conventional understanding. They had ships that could hide in plain sight, weapons that could turn infrastructure against itself, soldiers who could make space itself into a weapon. Worst of all, they fought with a ruthless efficiency that spoke of extensive experience in every form of combat imaginable. In the emergency session of the Galactic Council, representatives from a dozen species sat in stunned silence as report after report detailed the destruction of their military forces. The humans hadn't just won their defensive battles. They had done so with minimal losses while completely annihilating forces that should have overwhelmed them. "How?" whispered the Zephyrian delegate. "How were we so wrong about their capabilities?" Ambassador Chen Wei, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, finally stood to address the assembly. His voice was calm, almost gentle, as he delivered his species' ultimatum. "Honored delegates, You have spent 3 years observing humanity through the lens of your own expectations. You saw farmers and merchants and assumed we were weak. You saw our reluctance to engage in military displays and assumed we were harmless. He gestured to the tactical displays showing the results of the human counteroffensive. You forgot to consider that a species capable of colonizing hostile worlds might have learned something about warfare along the way. You forgot that peaceful retirement requires previous experience with violence. The chamber was completely silent as he continued. Humanity offers the Zephyrian Empire one opportunity to end this conflict: complete withdrawal from all claimed human territories and formal recognition of human sovereignty. You have 72 hours to respond. As the human ambassador left the chamber, the remaining delegates sat in stunned silence. They had started this war expecting to face a primitive, helpless species. Instead, they had awakened something that was already teaching the galaxy to fear the sound of human names whispered in the dark. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted permanently. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of assuming that peace meant powerlessness, or that humanity's restraint was anything other than a choice. The siege of Zephyria Prime had lasted 17 hours when Supreme Commander Vashkor realized that everything he understood about warfare was wrong. From the command bunker deep beneath the planet's surface, he watched tactical displays that showed impossible things. Human ships had somehow penetrated the most heavily defended system in the galaxy, passing through 3 separate defensive lines without triggering a single alarm. The first indication of their presence had been when the orbital defense platforms simply stopped responding to commands. "Sir," his aide reported, scales pale with fear, "we've lost contact with Defense Grid 7 and 8. And the young officer's voice trailed off as more sections of their planetary defenses went dark. "How many ships?" Vashkor demanded. We don't know, sir. They're not showing up on sensors. We only know they're there because our defenses keep being destroyed." Above them, the battle for Zephyria Prime was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Admiral Marcus Chin stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Retribution, watching his fleet execute maneuvers that would have been considered fantasy just weeks ago. Around him, ships that had been hidden for decades demonstrated why humanity had survived in hostile space for so long. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "stealth frigates report all orbital defenses neutralized. The planet is defenseless." "Acknowledged," Marcus replied. "Begin Phase 2. Signal the diplomatic corps." What happened next would be remembered as the moment the galaxy learned that humans didn't just fight differently. They thought differently. Instead of bombing the planet into submission, the human fleet broadcast a single message to every communication device on Zephyria Prime. The transmission showed a single human woman in diplomatic attire, standing in what appeared to be a simple office. "Citizens of Zephyria Prime," Ambassador Chun Wei said calmly, "I am addressing you directly because your government has chosen to ignore our attempts at peaceful resolution. My species does not make war on civilian populations. However, your military continues to threaten human colonies." The broadcast continued to every screen, every communication device, every public information terminal across the planet. Zephyrian civilians watched in stunned silence as the human ambassador delivered terms that their own government had refused to acknowledge. "We offer your empire one final opportunity for peace," she continued. "Complete withdrawal from human space, recognition of human sovereignty, and reparations for the vessels lost in your unprovoked attacks. Your government has 6 hours to respond." In his bunker, Supreme Commander Vashkor watched the broadcast with growing horror. Not because of the terms, those were negotiable, but because of what the transmission represented. The humans had somehow penetrated their most secure communication networks and taken control of their entire planetary information grid. "How are they doing this?" he demanded of his cyber warfare specialists. "Sir," the chief technician replied, "we're detecting massive intrusions across all networks, but they're not behaving like any attack protocols we've seen. It's as if they've rewritten the fundamental operating codes of our entire system. Can you stop it?" The technician's scales shifted to a defeated gray. "Sir, I don't think they're hacking our systems. I think they're speaking to them in a language we never knew existed." The truth was both simpler and more terrifying than the Zephyrians realized. Dr. Sarah Kim, The woman who had been tending vegetables on Haven Colony just days ago was actually one of humanity's foremost experts in quantum computing and artificial intelligence. The peaceful farming community where she had lived in retirement was also home to 17 other individuals who had previously worked on humanity's most classified technology projects. From her position aboard the stealth ship Whisper, Dr. Kim watched her code propagate through Zephyrian networks like a living thing. She had spent 6 months learning the fundamental architecture of galactic communication systems, and another 3 developing viruses specifically designed to turn those systems against their operators. Beautiful work, Sarah, Captain Rodriguez commented from the command chair. Their entire planetary grid is under our control. Thank you, she replied. Then, returned her attention to the data streams flowing across her display. I'm detecting increased military communications. They're planning some kind of counterattack. Let them plan, Rodriguez said with grim satisfaction. Time to show them what happens when you threaten human colonies. The counterattack came exactly as predicted. The Zephyrian home fleet, held in reserve to protect their capital world, emerged from hidden bases throughout the system. 200 warships, including their most advanced dreadnoughts, converged on the human position with overwhelming force. What they found waiting for them redefined their understanding of possible. The human fleet that decloaked around them wasn't just larger than intelligence had suggested. It was impossibly advanced. Ships that seemed to bend light around themselves. Weapons that fired projectiles made of compressed space-time. Shields that didn't block incoming fire so much as redirected into parallel dimensions. Admiral Keth Vash, commander of the Zephyrian home fleet, stared at his tactical display in disbelief. How do they have such technology? Our intelligence suggested they were barely capable of faster-than-light travel. His answer came from an unexpected source. The human admiral opened a direct communication channel, and when his image appeared on the screen, Admiral Kethvash saw something that shook him to his core. The human was smiling. Admiral Kethvash, Marcus Chin said pleasantly. I believe we haven't been properly introduced. I am Admiral Marcus Chun of the Human Deep Space Fleet. Before my retirement, I commanded exploration missions in the galactic core region. Impossible, Kethvash breathed. No species has successfully explored the core. The radiation levels alone would kill most organic life. Yes, Marcus agreed. Fortunately, humans are remarkably good at building things that work in impossible conditions. We've been exploring regions that your species consider uninhabitable for over 50 years. The implications of that statement settled over the Zephyrian command crew like a cold weight. If the humans had been operating in the galactic core, they had access to technologies and resources beyond anything the known galaxy had imagined. Sir, the Zephyrian tactical officer whispered. Their weapons' signatures, they're not using conventional physics. Marcus Chin's smile widened slightly. Admiral, your species made one critical error in your intelligence gathering. You observed our civilian vessels and assumed they represented our full capabilities. You never asked what happens to a species that survives in space for 50,000 years. What followed could hardly be called a battle. The human fleet moved with precision that seemed choreographed, their weapons reaching out across impossible distances to disable Zephyrian ships without destroying them. It was as if they were conducting a demonstration rather than fighting a war. When it was over, the entire Zephyrian home fleet hung dead in space, their crews alive, but their ships completely powerless. Not a single human vessel had taken damage. Admiral, Marcus Chin's voice came across the communication channel one final time. You now have 2 hours to consider our terms. I suggest you recommend acceptance to your government. In his bunker beneath the planet's surface, Supreme Commander Vashkor finally understood the magnitude of their mistake. The humans hadn't just hidden their military capabilities, they had hidden their entire civilization. The peaceful farmers and merchants the galaxy had observed were actually the retired veterans of a spacefaring culture that had been exploring and surviving in the most dangerous regions of the galaxy for millennia. Get me the Imperial Council, he ordered. Emergency session. Immediate. The emergency session of the Zephyrian Imperial Council convened as reports continued to flood in from across the Empire. Human forces were systematically dismantling military installations throughout Zephyrian space, but with surgical precision that avoided civilian casualties. It was becoming clear that humanity wasn't interested in conquest. They were delivering a message. Honored counselors, Vashkor addressed the assembled leaders. We must face an uncomfortable truth. Our intelligence about human capabilities was not merely incomplete, it was deliberately manipulated. The humans have been allowing us to observe only what they wanted us to see. You're suggesting they've been planning this? Council leader Vex Prime asked. I'm suggesting they've been preparing for this possibility for decades. Perhaps centuries. Vashkor activated a holographic display showing the tactical recordings from the battle. Look at their ship movements, their weapons coordination, their strategic thinking. This isn't a recently formed military force. This is a mature, experienced war machine that has been dormant until we gave them a reason to activate it. The council chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. They hadn't started a war with a primitive species. They had awakened something that had been waiting patiently for them to make exactly this mistake. Meanwhile, aboard the Retribution, Admiral Marcus Chin stood before a holographic projection of the Galactic Council emergency session. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy watched as he delivered humanity's final terms. Distinguished delegates, he began formally, humanity regrets the necessity of this demonstration. However, your collective decision to support Zephyrian expansion into human space left us no choice but to reveal capabilities we had hoped to keep in reserve. He gestured to tactical displays showing the scope of human operations. As you can see, human forces are currently operating in 17 different star systems. We have neutralized military threats while minimizing civilian casualties. This is our preferred method of warfare. The silence in the council chamber was profound. Representative after representative stared at displays showing the systematic dismantling of what had been considered the galaxy's most powerful military forces. Humanity offers the following terms for immediate peace, Marcus continued. Complete recognition of human territorial sovereignty. Formal apology for unprovoked aggression. Reparations for vessels destroyed in your attacks. And establishment of humanity as a permanent member of the Galactic Council with full voting rights. And if we refuse? The Korath delegate asked, his massive form trembling with fear. Marcus Chin's expression remained pleasant, but something in his eyes made every delegate in the chamber suddenly remember that they were watching a predator species that had learned to hide among peaceful herbivores. Then, we continue to demonstrate why it's unwise to mistake restraint for weakness, he replied simply. Humanity has no desire for conquest, but we will not tolerate aggression against our people. You have 24 hours to provide your answer. As the transmission ended, representatives from across the galaxy sat in stunned silence. They had collectively learned that the peaceful, primitive humans they had dismissed were actually the veterans of conflicts fought in regions of space too dangerous for any other species to explore. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had revealed itself as not just another spacefaring species, but as something entirely new, a civilization that had chosen peace not from weakness, but from strength so overwhelming that they could afford to be merciful. The war was effectively over. All that remained was for the galaxy to learn to live with the knowledge that humanity had been watching them, judging them, and preparing for this day all along. 6 months after the Zephyrian Accord was signed, Master Sergeant Sarah Kim stood in her garden on Haven Colony, watching the morning sun rise over vegetables that were finally growing without interruption. The emergency beacon that had called her back to war had been dismantled, its components recycled into farming equipment that would never again need to hide weapons beneath innocent appearances. The galaxy had changed, and so had humanity's place in it. Sarah, her husband, called from the house. You have a visitor. She looked up to see a young Zephyrian diplomat approaching through the garden paths, moving carefully to avoid disturbing the growing plants. His scales were a respectful blue-green, and he carried himself with the cautious deference that had become common among aliens visiting human worlds. Honored veteran, the diplomat began formally. I am Sub-Ambassador Crintel. I come seeking your wisdom. Sarah wiped soil from her hands and studied the young alien with amusement. 6 months ago, his species had considered humans too primitive to warrant respect. Now they sent diplomats to consult with retired farmers about military philosophy. What wisdom could an old gardener possibly offer the Zephyrian Empire? She asked gently. Crintel's scales shifted to embarrassed orange. Please, honored Kim. We know who you are. The woman who infiltrated our planetary communication networks and turned our own technology against us. Our intelligence services have been trying to understand how you accomplished such a feat. Have they considered asking? Sarah replied, settling onto a garden bench and gesturing for the diplomat to sit beside her. We did not think humans would share such information with former enemies. Sarah smiled at that. It was a common misconception among species that had just discovered humanity's true nature. Young Crintel, let me tell you something about humans that your intelligence services apparently missed. We don't consider the Zephyrian Empire our enemy. We never did. The diplomat's scales flickered with confusion. But the war was a misunderstanding, Sarah said firmly. Your empire mistook human restraint for weakness and attempted to exploit what you saw as an opportunity. We corrected that misunderstanding. Now we're neighbors again, hopefully with better communication this time. Across human space, similar conversations were taking place as the galaxy struggled to understand the species that had emerged from apparent primitiveness to reshape the balance of galactic power. On Earth, Admiral Marcus Chun had returned to his vineyard, where he found himself hosting an endless stream of alien military observers who wanted to understand human strategic thinking. The key, he explained to a delegation of Korath generals as they walked between rows of grapevines, is not thinking of warfare as your primary purpose. Humans fight when we must, but we prefer to build things. War is just problem-solving applied to hostile neighbors. The massive insectoid generals struggled with this concept. Their species had evolved from hive warriors, and warfare was central to their cultural identity. The idea that the most effective warriors in galactic history viewed fighting as merely one tool among many was difficult to accept. But your tactical innovations, General Thekvex insisted, the stealth technologies, the quantum weapons, the psychological warfare techniques, these represent centuries of military development. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. They represent centuries of survival in hostile environments. We developed stealth technology to avoid predators on colony worlds. Quantum weapons came from mining operations in unstable space. Psychological warfare evolved from dealing with isolation madness on long-term missions. He paused beside a particularly healthy vine, checking the ripeness of its grapes. Humans excel at warfare because we're good at surviving anywhere. We had to spread across the galaxy the way we have. This was the revelation that was slowly reshaping galactic politics. Humanity hadn't hidden a secret military empire. They had simply applied their survival skills to organized conflict when forced to do so. The techniques that made them terrifying warriors were the same ones that made them excellent farmers, miners, explorers, and diplomats. In the chambers of the Galactic Council, this new understanding was creating unprecedented changes. Ambassador Chen Wei, once dismissed as representing a primitive species, now found herself at the center of every major galactic decision. The Andromedans are requesting mediation in their border dispute with the Centauri Confederation, the council moderator informed her. Both sides have specifically requested human arbitration. Chen Wei nodded thoughtfully. It had become a pattern since the war ended. Species that had once ignored human opinions now sought them out specifically. Not because they feared human military power, but because humanity had demonstrated something the galaxy had forgotten. It was possible to be strong without being aggressive. I'll review the case files, she agreed. Though I should point out that humans have no particular expertise in Andromedan cultural disputes. Perhaps, the moderator replied. But you have expertise in resolving conflicts without resorting to destruction. That appears to be a rare skill in our galaxy. The truth was that humanity was teaching the galaxy lessons it hadn't realized it needed to learn. For thousands of years, galactic civilization had operated on the assumption that military power was the ultimate arbiter of disputes. The strong dominated the weak, and peace was simply the temporary absence of war. Humanity offered a different model, strength used in service of peace rather than conquest. They had demonstrated the ability to completely destroy their enemies while choosing instead to defeat them with minimal casualties and maximum restraint. Dr. Sarah Kim had returned to her research, but Now her work was done in the open rather than hidden in farming communities. Her laboratory on Haven Colony had become a destination for scholars from across the galaxy, all seeking to understand the technological innovations that had made human victory possible. The quantum intrusion protocols weren't actually that complex, she explained to a group of ethereal researchers who had manifested their crystalline forms in her lab. We simply approached the problem differently than anyone expected. But how did you anticipate our defensive measures? One of them asked. Our cybersecurity was designed to be impenetrable. Sarah smiled as she adjusted the settings on a quantum computer that would have been considered impossible technology just months ago. You designed it to be impenetrable to anyone thinking like you. We don't think like you. We think like survivors who've spent 50,000 years figuring out how to make things work when they shouldn't. This was becoming humanity's unofficial motto in galactic affairs. We think differently. Where other species saw insurmountable obstacles, humans saw engineering challenges. Where others saw inevitable conflicts, humans saw negotiation opportunities. Where others saw the need for conquest, humans saw the possibility of cooperation. The changes weren't limited to military and diplomatic affairs. Human agricultural techniques were revolutionizing food production on worlds that had struggled with famine for centuries. Human mining operations were extracting resources from asteroids and gas giants that other species had considered too dangerous to approach. Human exploration teams were mapping regions of space that had been written off as uninhabitable. Captain Elena Vasquez had returned to cargo hauling, but now her routes took her to places that had been forbidden to human vessels just months ago. Her ship, the Peaceful Trader, was welcomed in ports across the galaxy as species that had once viewed humans as primitives now sought them out as partners and advisors. It's strange, she commented to her crew as they departed from a Korth commercial station where they had been treated like honored guests. 6 months ago, these same people were shooting at us. Now they're asking for our help with everything from ship design to family counseling. Maybe they finally figured out what we've known all along, her engineer replied. Humans are useful to have around, as long as you don't try to push us around. The final piece of humanity's emergence onto the galactic stage came with the completion of the Human Cultural Exchange Program. Veterans who had spent decades hiding their true nature were finally free to share their experiences with a galaxy that was eager to learn. Master Sergeant Tom Bradley found himself teaching asteroid mining techniques to engineers from a dozen different species. Captain Rodriguez was consulting with planetary defense forces on stealth tactics and irregular warfare. Admiral Sarah Chun had been appointed as the first human member of the Galactic Strategic Defense Council. The funny thing, Tom commented during a break in his teaching schedule, is that we're not actually teaching them anything we didn't already know. We're just teaching them how we think about problems. And how do humans think about problems? Asked one of his students, a young Zephyrian engineer whose scales flickered with curiosity. Tom considered the question carefully. We assume there's always a solution, he said finally. Other species seem to accept that some things are impossible. Humans assume that impossible just means we haven't figured it out yet. This philosophy was reshaping the galaxy in ways no one had anticipated. Projects that had been abandoned as impossible were being reconsidered with human consultation. Conflicts that had been considered intractable were being resolved through human mediation. Technologies that had been dismissed as fantasy were being developed in human laboratories. The galaxy was learning that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or their tactics. It was their refusal to accept that problems couldn't be solved. As Sarah Kim watched the sunset from her garden, she reflected on how much had changed. The emergency beacon that could call her back to war would never sound again. Not because there would never be conflicts, but because humanity had established itself as something the galaxy had never seen before, a species strong enough to enforce peace without needing to conquer anyone. Her husband joined her on the garden bench, settling beside her with the comfortable ease of a relationship that had survived both war and peace. Any regrets? He asked softly. Sarah considered the question, looking out over gardens that no longer hid weapons, toward a sky where human ships moved freely through space that had once been forbidden to them. The galaxy had learned to respect humanity not through fear, but through the recognition that humans offered something unique, the strength to protect without the need to dominate. No regrets, she said finally. We showed them what we are when we have to be. Now we get to show them what we are when we choose to be. The war had lasted 37 days. The peace that followed would endure for generations, built on the foundation of a simple truth the galaxy had finally learned. Humanity was exactly as dangerous as they needed to be, and exactly as peaceful as they chose to be. The veterans had returned to their gardens and workshops, their minds and laboratories. But the galaxy would never again make the mistake of assuming that peaceful meant powerless, or that restraint was anything other than a choice made by those strong enough to choose differently. Humanity had taken its place among the stars not as conquerors, but as the guardians of a peace they had proven themselves capable of enforcing. The lesson would never be forgotten. When humanity said, please, it was a request. When they said no, it was final. The galaxy had learned to listen to both.